The car market is way worse than I could have ever imagined. We're seeing repossessions 23% in the last half, as well as we've never seen levels pop like this since 2021-22, but we got a drop because a lot of the banks were giving relief to buyers, but now interest rates are elevated, costs of these vehicles are elevated, and people literally can't afford to make these payments after being stuck with $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 a month payments. People have nowhere to go. It's no surprise we've seen the banks increase rates dramatically in the last few years. Back in 2020, interest rates were very low, lending rates were very agreeable, and people decided to start buying vehicles. The unfortunate part is the car dealers didn't necessarily have the inventory for people to buy it. Then all of this scurrying around, dealers finally got a lot of inventory in, and interest rates started to climb, and everybody wanted to get out there and spend that money, whether the bank owned it or they owned it. But there was a feeling that once inventory started to climb, like we're seeing right here, that the buyers would naturally be satisfied. The insatiable appetite to buy new vehicles would be satisfied. But that never really happened. People kept buying and buying and buying. And in many cases, people who really couldn't afford to buy a vehicle were still able to get a loose purse string opened up by the bank, and they were going down buying some of these expensive new vehicles. Because remember, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen vehicle prices escalate 30, 40, 50, 60% above what they were 2 short years earlier. And most of these car dealers grossly exceeded the average inflationary rates, which is more like 3 to 4% of the core inflation. These vehicle manufacturers decide to take advantage of many desperate buyers. For example, there was a time when a F-150 like this mid-spec was very affordable for the mainstream. An F-150 XLT was considered a lower to mid-spec vehicle. You get an XL, they have an STX. But now, of course, prices have gone through the roof. And to look at a lot of these vehicle prices right here, we have an F-150 XLT, very low spec. I look inside, and there is all kinds of, plastic, basically simple seats. You have the small display in there. It's a very basic looking vehicle, but this F-150 XLT goes for $79,000, 80 grand for this truck. Pushed a lot of people out of the market. But then Ford came out with something like this, the Maverick, which was a cost-effective way that they promised they were going to bring an entry-level, small-scale pickup truck to the buyer for fractions of the dollars of an F-150. Well, let's take a look. What do we have here? This is a Lariat version. As you notice right there, you get the painted gloss, beautiful wheels. Let's take a look around. You get the painted handles. You do get a sunroof on there. So this is clearly an upper trim, top level pretty much of the Maverick. And of course you have the little liner in here. You definitely have the slider on the back. Beautiful vehicle, but Maverick, oh, $49,979. That takes the cake. So once was supposed to be an affordable truck for $25,000, $30,000. Now we're finding them at 50. Even garden variety Mustangs like this go for $57,000. Made a car like this was a good old-fashioned American-made muscle car for the American buyer is out of reach by a lot of people. They could no longer afford a lot of these vehicles. And the few people that were able to slip through the cracks, convince the banks that they had enough money, now many of them are finding themselves in a serious pickle, unable to afford these brand new vehicles because they're riding right under that line of affordability. And many people can't afford it and others can barely afford it. And that's where the big problem arises, getting the commitment, buying one of these vehicles, and then not being able to make the payments. Right there we have an F-150 Lariat. Any idea? This is the Lightning though. As you can see, these have not been selling very well. And a lot of electric vehicles, doesn't matter if you're talking about Ford, GM, Stellantis, it doesn't matter. Electric vehicles have not been selling all that well, and they're highly incentivized. These ones here, not moving all that well. But take a look at this truck. This makes me laugh because this must be an internal code. When somebody comes up here and puts a $ right here on the window, that tells me that there's an internal signal here to the salespeople. This one's a moneymaker. But it's in all seriousness, a lot of the repossessions are kicking into high gear, and we're seeing the repo man showing up, knocking on the doors of millions of Americans this year. It's going to get ugly. With about 1.1 million units repossessed back in 2021, we saw a bit of a break for a lot of customers. The banks were giving a lot of breaks. People definitely had to stay home. They couldn't work, and the governments were throwing handouts. People were spending, and even if they couldn't make the payments, the banks were basically giving a lot of delay pay, a lot of buffer space for people who are struggling with making their payments, and so they didn't come back looking for those vehicles. But then last year we saw as many as 1.5 million units repossessed, and this year by the end of 2024 it promises to be looking about 1.6 million plus units will be waving bye-bye and saying adios to the repossession man as he drives away with your pretty new pickup truck. Sadly, I know all too many people that got yanked back to the office. They were working from home, they were getting government handouts and extra money available to them. They were going out there buying cars, but then all of a sudden that all dried up. Corporations wanted people to get back to work. It now costs people daily expenses to get to and from work, with gas costs, eating lunches, and of course everything else started to kick into high gear. Sports for the kids and everything else started to increase, and the cost of living started to devastate American and Canadian households. And then along comes the cost of living increases. These manufacturers continue to jack up the prices of their vehicles. It doesn't matter if it's a car, truck, SUV, almost every manufacturer found opportunities to keep bumping up the prices, left people looking and stretching even further, thinning themselves out even further to try to get themselves either a car loan or afford a new vehicle. And come spring, March of this year, we saw an extraordinarily high average monthly car payment. And it even went up in April, the month after, by 1.8%, up to a whopping $762 per month for the average car payment, even for a nickel and dime small vehicle. This is the average. Not one of these full-size pickup trucks like this, not a big, beautiful electric vehicle, not a full-size SUV like these, or these fancy new hot-to-trot Ford Broncos, or even these massive expeditions like this, and this King Ranch here, as we noticed there, actually costs $111,000, is extraordinarily expensive. No, less and less people had money for those big full-size SUVs and trucks. Rather, more people went for a vehicle like this, a more of a smaller subcompact pickup truck, or even a smaller SUV like these Ford Bronco Sports, or even a little Ford Escape is one of the popular choices that a lot of people were going to. And these are the very vehicles that are dropping down the average, because none of these vehicles are all that cheap. And would you believe about 19% of car loans today have now exceeded over $1,000 a month? I've seen many that are $1,500 and $1,800 a month. It's absolutely ridiculous, ludicrous, and most people are now struggling to make these payments. Have you ever heard the saying, it takes two to tango? I like to say it takes three to tango, because the problem here is trifold. There's one problem. We have the OEMs and the manufacturers continually escalating the prices of all their brand new vehicles, and that continually hurts the buyer when their wages don't go up and follow suit with the increased costs that we're seeing annually on the price of a lot of these vehicles. Then the second part is the interest rates. The interest rates continue to climb, or at least they're holding steady. And I'm not sure, from many analysts I'm hearing and talking to in the financial world, that we're ever going to see anything drastically drop. We might see a couple basis points, maybe 0.5% over the next course of a couple of years, but really not enough to make any significant difference. And that's the struggles. But then the trifold, the third point, is why people keep getting into a snooker and get their vehicles repossessed. People see these beautiful, shiny new toys like this, and they want it. They see all these fancy, pretty trucks, cars, even these SUVs like this, and people just want to get into. They justify, hey, I work hard for my money. I deserve this. I've done working for 4 years. I haven't had a new vehicle in like 6 years. I deserve it. But that's the problem. People are getting themselves into a world of hurt. And did you also realize they're expecting in 2025 the number of repossessions to escalate up to 1.7 million units, and even by somewhere in between 2026 and 2030, we'd almost expect to see 1.8 to almost 2 million units repossessed across US. Another big part of the problem is this herd mentality. They hear the numbers, and people are weak in the sense that they hear the numbers that people are buying. Oh yeah, sales are up, sales are up. Ford's bragging their sales of their full-size vehicles are up. Mazda's selling, Honda's selling, Toyota's selling, everybody's selling, GM, Stellantis, okay, they're not selling, but everybody's claiming that they're selling all their vehicles, and it gets people in a buzz. They feel like, oh, I should get out there. There's also the Joneses concept, where they think, okay, my buddy just bought one, maybe I should buy one too. I like his truck. You know what? I'm gonna buy one too. It's about time. I mean, I see a lot of vehicles here. I'd love some of these. I mean, let's take a quick look at some of the vehicles that I would even look at. I mean, what are my personal favorites on this lot? I personally like the Bronco, the full-size Bronco. I'm a big fan of that vehicle. I mean, the Raptor looks great, but it's far too overpriced. You don't need to spend Raptor dollar. You can still get the same drivetrain in a lot of lower trim vehicles. I definitely like the looks of this one. You know, they've got the nice sharp looking wheels on there. This is a Badlands. Definitely some nice trim on here. You got the hard roof. You definitely need the hard roof here, and where I live in the cold frozen Arctic here, we definitely get a lot of hard weather, and you want a means to protect the bodywork and the interior of the vehicle. So of course going with the soft top isn't really the best, but I love the Broncos. I think they're cool, they're great, they're a lot of fun. It's a great alternative to the Jeep. So that's probably one of my top picks. I also like the Ford Mustang GT. I had one of these many years ago and I loved it. Mine was a stick. Mine was the 5-liter V8 engine, and now you have the latest and greatest. These are great vehicles, and really the bottom line is there aren't many cars these days in the market anymore. People aren't buying cars. Everybody wants trucks, SUVs, but not too many cars on the market, and not just sports cars, but cars in general. I love the way they sit. I love the low stance, and they just typically handle a lot better. So I enjoy driving a car, and the Mustang GT usually fits the bill, although for these kind of price tags, that's a little bit rich for this cowboy. But see, that's part of the problem. People have been stretched in the last 4 years. They're getting pulled too tightly. Cost of living's going up. Have you seen McDonald's Big Mac meal lately? That's getting out of hand. You've seen lots of restaurants jacking up their prices. You see, it doesn't matter if you're buying alcohol, cigarettes, food, anything, the bare essentials, rent, anything you're looking at today, the common consumer good is going up at an alarming rate, and people are getting squeezed, stretched thinner and thinner and thinner, with corporations that they work for are pushing them harder, working twice as long, working harder. And of course, people just have to work extra 2-3 jobs for the price of one. Wages aren't going up. They're not following the price of what some of these vehicles are, and that's putting people in a tough spot. But don't get yourself in a tough spot, because that's what I've always said, is put a much larger down payment. I would say 20%, 25% of that vehicle. If you're looking at a $40,000 vehicle, put down a deposit of at least $10,000, and you'll put yourself in a better position. And also set it up so that your monthly payments are within a small affordable threshold, and you're only making those payments for 3 to 4 years maximum. You don't want to be tied up to an 84-month payment and then absolutely find yourself underwater somewhere along the way, because a lot can happen in 84 months. Loss of job, illness, anything, and that's when people get into a snooker. So definitely, people just have to pay a little more attention, bite off a little less than they can chew, and if they need a new vehicle, get into something that's more affordable at a shorter term purchase time frame, and then we all should be able to get through this in one piece. And definitely, you want to check that video right there. Ford, like this, they have retracted on what they're doing for EV sales. That's right, they're not too excited about it anymore. Definitely want to see that. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. Catch you real soon. Bye-bye.